behind you. You need to learn some respect.
I didn't do anything wrong! Stop accusing me! I am innocent of that allegation!
She was expelled from school in front of everyone, accused of bullying 5 students she'd never even touched. But what they didn't know was that this little girl had evidence that would bring the entire system crashing down. This is the story of Maya Richardson, and how one 10-year-old girl exposed the truth that adults refused to see. Maya Richardson was 10 years old when her world turned upside down. She had warm brown eyes that sparkled when she smiled, wore her hair in 2 neat braids that her grandmother plaited every morning, and carried a worn backpack covered in patches her mother had sewn on over the years. Each patch told a story: a sunflower from her grandmother's garden, a book from her favorite library, a small rainbow her aunt had added when Maya told her she wanted the world to be more colorful. Maya's mother, Diane Richardson, worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment and to send Maya to Westbridge Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the city. Diane cleaned offices at night and worked as a medical assistant during the day. She barely slept, but every morning she made sure Maya had a hot breakfast and a packed lunch. Diane herself had grown up poor, never finishing college because she had to work to support her younger siblings. But she was determined that Maya would have every opportunity she never had. She scraped together tuition payments, applied for scholarships, and worked extra shifts so Maya could attend a school where the possibilities seemed endless. Westbridge Academy sat on a sprawling green campus with old brick buildings covered in ivy, modern science labs, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and tennis courts that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Most students arrived in luxury cars driven by parents or chauffeurs. Their uniforms were always pristine, their shoes always polished. Maya walked 3 blocks from the bus stop every morning, sometimes arriving with mud on her shoes when it rained, always carrying that patched backpack that looked so different from the designer bags everyone else had. From her very first day at Westbridge, Maya knew she was different. She was one of only 7 black students in a school of 400. When she walked into her 5th grade classroom that September morning, conversations stopped. Eyes followed her. Whispers started. She found her assigned seat and sat down, trying to smile at the girl next to her. The girl looked away. At lunch that first day, Maya carried her tray to an empty spot at a table. Within seconds, 5 girls approached. Their leader was Brittany Montgomery, a blonde girl with perfectly styled hair, designer accessories on her uniform, and a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. Brittany's father owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Her mother sat on the school board. Standing next to Brittany was Madison Clark, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels. Then there was Ashton Wells, whose father was a prominent attorney. Harper Daniels came from old money, the kind of wealth that had been in her family for generations. And finally there was Sienna Morrison, whose mother was a famous television personality. Brittany leaned over Maya's tray, her voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I think you're in the wrong cafeteria. The scholarship kids usually eat in the other building." The 4 girls behind her giggled. Maya's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Brittany's smile grew wider and meaner. "We'll see about that." What followed were weeks of calculated cruelty. The 5 girls were masters of psychological warfare, the kind of bullying that left no visible bruises but cut deeper than any physical wound. They accidentally knocked Maya's books off her desk, papers scattering everywhere. They whispered just loud enough for her to hear, comments about her clothes, her hair, her backpack, the fact that she brought lunch from home instead of buying the catered meals from the school's gourmet cafeteria. They started rumors. Maya supposedly cheated on tests. Maya supposedly stole things from lockers. Maya supposedly said terrible things about other students behind their backs. None of it was true, but the rumors spread like wildfire through the privileged halls of Westbridge Academy. Other students began avoiding Maya, not wanting to be associated with the drama or risk becoming targets themselves. In class, when Maya raised her hand to answer questions, Brittany would cough loudly, disrupting her. When Maya gave presentations, the 5 girls would whisper and laugh in the back row. Teachers noticed but did nothing. After all, the Montgomery family had just donated a new library wing. The Clark family funded the drama program. The Wells family sponsored the debate team. The Daniels family endowed several scholarships, ironically. And the Morrison family brought media attention and prestige to every school event they attended. Maya tried to stay strong. She told herself that she was there to learn, to build a future, to make her mother's sacrifices worth it. She buried herself in her studies, earning top grades despite the hostile environment. She helped other students who struggled with math, shared her notes, volunteered to clean up after art class. She tried to be kind, hoping that kindness would eventually break through the walls of prejudice around her. But the bullying escalated. One day Maya opened her locker to find her favorite book, a copy of Brown Girl Dreaming her grandmother had given her, torn to shreds, pages scattered everywhere. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall where anyone could see. She gathered the pieces, took them home, and tried to tape them back together late into the night. Another day, someone put glue on her chair right before English class. Maya sat down before she noticed, and when she stood up, her skirt stuck to the seat. Laughter erupted. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, sighed and told Maya to go to the bathroom to clean up, as if the humiliation was somehow Maya's inconvenience to deal with. Maya walked through the halls with her sweater tied around her waist, fighting back tears, knowing exactly who was responsible when she passed Brittany and her friends high-fiving near the lockers. The cyberbullying started next. Someone created a fake social media account in Maya's name, posting offensive content designed to make her look bad. Screenshots circulated. Maya didn't even have social media, her mother couldn't afford a smartphone for her, but that didn't matter. The damage was done. Students who had been neutral before now looked at her with disgust or pity. Through it all, Maya documented everything. She had learned this from her mother, who kept meticulous records of every bill, every payment, every important document. Maya started a journal, writing down every incident with dates and times. She asked her grandmother, who was good with technology despite her age, to help her figure out how to collect evidence. Her grandmother showed her how to take screenshots when possible, how to save messages, how to keep a record. Maya's grandmother, Ruth Richardson, was a retired teacher who had fought her own battles against discrimination in the school system decades ago. She had marched in civil rights protests, had faced down administrators who tried to silence her when she advocated for her students. When May came to her with tearful stories of what was happening at Westbridge, Ruth's jaw tightened with familiar anger, but she also saw an opportunity to teach her granddaughter something invaluable: how to fight injustice with truth and documentation. Ruth gave Maya an old smartphone, one that still worked for taking photos and videos. "Keep this in your backpack," she told her granddaughter. "You don't have to show it to anyone, but if something happens, document it. One day the truth matters more than their money." Maya started capturing evidence. A video of Brittany deliberately tripping her in the hallway while other students laughed. An audio recording of Madison and Harper discussing their plan to frame Maya for stealing from the art supply closet. Screenshots of the fake social media posts with metadata showing they came from IP addresses connected to the school's network at times when Maya wasn't even on campus. Photographs of the hateful notes left in her locker. But Maya made a critical mistake. She trusted a teacher. Miss Patricia Holbrook was Maya's history teacher, a woman in her 40s who seemed different from the other faculty. She didn't wear designer clothes, drove an older car, and sometimes shared stories about growing up without much money. Maya thought she would understand. After a particularly brutal week where someone had spread a rumor that Maya's mother was in jail, which led to students literally moving away when Maya sat near them in the library, Maya approached Ms. Holbrook after class. With trembling hands, Maya showed Ms. Holbrook her journal, her evidence, everything. She explained the months of bullying, the systematic harassment, the way it was affecting her grades and her mental health. Ms. Holbrook listened with what seemed like genuine concern, nodding, her face showing appropriate shock and sympathy. "Maya, this is serious," Ms. Holbrook said, putting her hand on Maya's shoulder. "I'm going to take this to Principal Whitmore. He needs to see this. These girls need to face consequences." Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Finally, an adult was listening. Finally, something would be done. She went home that night feeling hope for the first time in months. She told her mother that she'd spoken to a teacher, that things were going to get better. Diane hugged her daughter tight, relief flooding through her. Maybe the sacrifices were worth it. Maybe the system would work. But Maya didn't know that Miss Holbrook's younger sister was married to Ashton Wells's uncle. She didn't know that Miss Holbrook regularly attended social events where she mingled with the families of Westbridge's wealthiest donors. She didn't know that Miss Holbrook's position at the school depended on maintaining good relationships with these families. 3 days later, Maya was called to Principal Whitmore's office. Principal Gerald Whitmore was a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair, expensive suits, and the kind of confidence that came from years of managing wealthy donors rather than managing education. His office was filled with awards and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. A portrait of the school's founding family hung behind his desk. Maya walked into his office expecting to finally tell her side of the story. Instead, she found Brittany Montgomery and her 4 friends sitting in chairs across from Principal Whitmore's desk, their faces arranged in expressions of hurt and fear. Their parents stood behind them, a wall of wealth and power dressed in designer suits and dresses. Principal Whitmore didn't even ask Maya to sit down. He stood behind his desk, his face grave, and spoke in the tone of someone delivering a verdict already decided. Maya Richardson, we have received very serious allegations against you. These 5 students have come forward with evidence that you have been systematically bullying them for months. They have documentation of threats, harassment, and intimidation. Their parents have shown me messages, recordings, and witness statements from other students. Maya's mouth fell open. What? No, that's not true. They've been bullying me. Brittany's mother, Catherine Montgomery, a woman whose face had been surgically perfected and whose jewelry probably cost more than Diane's annual salary, stepped forward. My daughter has been terrorized by this girl. She's been afraid to come to school. We have evidence of threatening messages, physical intimidation, and racist comments directed at my daughter and her friends. Racist comments? Maya's voice rose in disbelief. That doesn't even make sense. Principal Whitmore held up his hand. Ms. Richardson, I've seen the evidence. These families have documented everything. Multiple students have come forward to support their claims. The behavior they've described is completely unacceptable at Westbridge Academy. Maya's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, the one her grandmother had given her. I have evidence too. I've been documenting what they've done to me for months. But Principal Whitmore wasn't interested. I've already made my decision. Effective immediately, you are expelled from Westbridge Academy. Your behavior has created a hostile environment for these students, and we cannot tolerate bullying in any form. The room spun. Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. You can't do this. You haven't even looked at my evidence. You haven't heard my side. Madison Clark's father, Richard Clark, spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to getting his way. Principal Whitmore has made the right decision. Our children's safety and well-being must come first. We've been more than patient, but this has gone on long enough. Can you believe they were trying to expel her without even looking at her evidence? What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments below. Maya turned to Ms. Holbrook, who was standing near the door. You saw my journal. You saw what they did to me. Tell them. Ms. Holbrook looked away, her face flushed with guilt but her voice steady. I'm sorry, Maya, but after reviewing all the evidence, I have to support Principal Whitmore's decision. The documentation from these families is quite compelling. Betrayal crashed over Maya like a wave. The one teacher she trusted had sold her out. Her vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. I want to call my mother, Maya said, her voice breaking. That won't be necessary, Principal Whitmore replied. Security will escort you to collect your belongings, and we'll contact your mother with the official expulsion paperwork. 2 security guards, looking uncomfortable but following orders, appeared at the door. Maya was walked through the halls of Westbridge Academy like a criminal. Students poured out of classrooms, summoned by the commotion. They lined the hallways, watching, whispering, recording on their phones. Brittany and her friends followed behind, their faces masks of false distress. Maya held her head high even as tears streamed down her face. She went to her locker, gathered her things into that patched backpack and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Brittany whisper to Harper, just loud enough for Maya to hear, "Good riddance." Something inside Maya snapped. She stopped walking, turned around, and faced the crowd of students and teachers who had gathered to watch her humiliation. Her voice, when she spoke, was loud and clear, carrying through the hallway with a strength that surprised even her. You're all watching this like it's entertainment. You're recording it for your social media. But not one of you asked what really happened. Not one of you cared about the truth. In a few months, when the real story comes out, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember that you were part of this. Principal Whitmore stepped forward, his face red with anger. That's enough, Ms. Richardson. Leave now or I'll have you removed. Maya turned and walked out of Westbridge Academy, her back straight, her head high, even as her heart shattered into pieces. When Diane Richardson received the call from the school, she left work immediately, terror gripping her chest. By the time she reached home, Maya was sitting on their worn couch, still in her uniform, staring at nothing. The expulsion letter had been emailed, formal and final, citing documented evidence of bullying behavior and the safety of other students. Diane read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. Then she looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. Tell me everything, she said. And Maya did. She showed her mother everything she'd documented, every piece of evidence, every entry in her journal. She told her about the months of harassment, the escalating cruelty, the betrayal by Ms. Holbrook, the kangaroo court in Principal Whitmore's office. Diane's face went through a transformation as she listened, from shock to anger to something harder and more determined. When Maya finished, Diane pulled her daughter into her arms and held her while she finally broke down, sobbing into her mother's shoulder all the pain she'd been holding back. "Baby," Diane said, her own voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I'm sorry I sent you to that place. I'm sorry I wasn't there. But I promise you this is not over. They don't know who they're dealing with." But Diane, for all her determination, didn't know how to fight this battle. She was exhausted from working 2 jobs. She didn't have money for lawyers. She didn't have connections or influence. She felt helpless against the machinery of wealth and power that had crushed her daughter. That evening Ruth Richardson came over. She sat at their small kitchen table, put on her reading glasses, and went through every piece of Maya's evidence with the careful eye of someone who had spent decades teaching children to think critically and document thoroughly. "This is good work," Ruth said, looking at her granddaughter with pride and pain. "You did everything right, Maya. You collected evidence. You tried to work through the proper channels. You did what we teach children to do when they face injustice." "And it didn't matter," Maya said bitterly. "It matters," Ruth corrected gently. "It always matters. They think they've silenced you, but the truth is still the truth, whether they acknowledge it or not." Ruth pulled out her old laptop, one that moved slowly but still worked, and started typing emails. She reached out to civil rights organizations, to educational advocacy groups, to journalists who had covered stories of discrimination in schools. Most never responded. A few sent form letters expressing sympathy but explaining they couldn't take on new cases. Days turned into a week. Maya didn't leave the apartment. She felt like she was drowning in shame and anger. Her mother had to take time off work she couldn't afford to lose to stay with her. The rent was due and they were already behind. The expulsion meant Maya's scholarship to Westbridge was gone, and there was no way Diane could afford another private school. The public schools in their district were overcrowded and underfunded. Everything Diane had worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, seemed to be collapsing around them. But Ruth kept sending emails. She kept making phone calls. She used every connection from her decades of teaching, every colleague, every former student who had gone on to careers where they might be able to help. On the 8th day after Maya's expulsion, Ruth received a response. It came from Marcus Thompson, a civil rights attorney who had been one of Ruth's students 30 years ago. Marcus had grown up in the same neighborhood, had faced his own battles with discrimination, and had built a career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. His law firm usually took on major cases, class action lawsuits, constitutional challenges. But when he saw the email from his former teacher, the woman who had believed in him when few others did, he read it carefully. Then he read the evidence Maya had collected. And he saw something that made his jaw tighten with familiar anger. A clear, documented case of discrimination, retaliation, and institutional racism, all wrapped up in the guise of protecting wealthy white students from a black child they had systematically bullied. Marcus called Ruth that evening. "I want to meet with your granddaughter," he said. 2 days later, Marcus Thompson sat in the Richardson family's small living room, his expensive suit looking out of place among their thrift store furniture. But he didn't seem to notice or care. He was focused entirely on Maya, who sat across from him with her journal, her phone, and all her evidence laid out on the coffee table. Marcus was in his mid-40s, with close-cropped hair showing hints of gray, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that commanded respect. He had argued cases before federal judges, had won settlements that made headlines, had taken on corporations and government entities. But he listened to this 10-year-old girl with the same serious attention he'd give any client. Maya told her story again, but this time, someone was really listening. Marcus took notes, asked questions, reviewed every piece of evidence carefully. He spent 3 hours with the Richardson family that evening, and when he finally sat back, he looked at Maya with respect. "You built a solid case," he told her. "Most adults couldn't do what you did. You documented everything, you kept detailed records, you collected evidence. That takes intelligence and courage." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Then why didn't it matter? Why didn't anyone believe me?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Because institutions like Westbridge protect power, not truth. They protect money, not children." Principal Whitmore looked at those 5 families and saw donations, prestige, influence. He looked at you and saw someone expendable. But he made a mistake. "What mistake?" Diane asked, leaning forward. He documented his own bias, Marcus said, holding up the expulsion letter. This letter cites evidence that he claims proves Maya was bullying these girls. But he never investigated Maya's counterclaims. He never looked at her evidence. He made a decision before Maya even walked into his office. That's not due process. That's discrimination. Can you help us? Ruth asked quietly. Marcus looked at the 3 Richardson women, 3 generations of strength and dignity facing down a system designed to exclude them. I'm going to do more than help you. I'm going to make sure this story is heard. And I'm going to make sure Westbridge Academy faces consequences for what they've done. The next week moved quickly. Marcus filed a federal civil rights complaint against Westbridge Academy, Principal Whitmore, and the 5 families whose children had bullied Maya. The complaint detailed months of racially motivated harassment, the school's failure to protect Maya, and the retaliatory expulsion designed to silence her. Marcus also did something else. He contacted the media. One of Marcus's colleagues had connections to a local investigative journalist named Sarah Chin, a woman known for her hard-hitting stories about institutional corruption and abuse of power. Sarah had won awards for her exposés, and she was always looking for stories that mattered. When Sarah reviewed the evidence Marcus provided, her reporter instincts fired on all cylinders. This wasn't just a story about a school expulsion. This was a story about wealth, privilege, race, and the way institutions failed children. She pitched it to her editor, who immediately greenlit a full investigation. Sarah started digging. She interviewed former Westbridge students who had witnessed the bullying but were too afraid to speak up. She found other families who had pulled their children from Westbridge after facing similar discrimination. She obtained records of complaints that had been filed against Brittany and her friends over the years, complaints that had been dismissed or buried by the administration. She also discovered something explosive. This wasn't the first time Principal Whitmore had expelled a student of color under questionable circumstances. In the past 5 years, 7 students had been expelled from Westbridge. All 7 were students of color. All 7 had come from lower-income families on scholarship. And in several cases, the expelled students had accused wealthier white students of bullying or harassment shortly before their expulsion. The pattern was damning. Sarah also interviewed teachers who had left Westbridge, people who were willing to speak now that they no longer feared retaliation. They described an environment where wealthy donors had outsized influence on school policies, where complaints against children from prominent families were routinely dismissed, and where faculty were pressured to maintain the school's prestigious image at all costs. One former teacher, a woman named Jennifer Martinez who had taught science at Westbridge for 5 years before quitting in frustration, was particularly forthcoming. I watched it happen over and over again, she told Sarah, her voice shaking with emotion. A kid from a wealthy family would do something wrong, sometimes really wrong, and it would be covered up. But if a scholarship kid made even a small mistake, they'd be punished severely. The double standard was blatant. Ms. Martinez had actually witnessed some of the bullying Maya experienced. I saw those 5 girls torment that child, she said. I reported it to administration multiple times. I was told to stop making waves. When I persisted, I was told that perhaps Westbridge wasn't the right fit for me. I loved teaching, but I couldn't stay in a place that betrayed its own values. While Sarah worked on her investigation, Marcus prepared his legal case. He deposed Principal Whitmore, who became defensive and evasive when asked why he had never reviewed Maya's evidence. He deposed Ms. Holbrook, who broke down crying during her testimony, admitting that she had felt pressured to side with the wealthy families. Marcus also deposed the 5 girls who had bullied Maya. With their expensive lawyers present, Brittany, Madison, Ashton, Harper, and Sienna sat through uncomfortable questioning about their behavior. Their carefully rehearsed stories started to crack under Marcus's methodical examination. Inconsistencies emerged. Details didn't match. When confronted with Maya's evidence, videos, recordings, screenshots, they stumbled over their explanations. Brittany's deposition was particularly revealing. Marcus played the recording Maya had captured of Brittany discussing plans to frame Maya for theft. "Is that your voice?" Marcus asked. Brittany's lawyer objected, but the answer was obvious. "It sounds like me, but..." "And you're discussing how to make it look like Maya Richardson stole from the art supply closet, correct?" "I was just joking with my friends. We didn't actually..." "But Maya was subsequently accused of that theft, wasn't she? And that accusation was cited in her expulsion letter." Brittany went pale. Her mother, sitting behind her, looked furious. Marcus also obtained the metadata from the fake social media accounts created in Maya's name. His technology expert traced them back to IP addresses associated with the homes of 3 of the 5 girls. When confronted with this evidence, their stories began to completely fall apart. 3 weeks after Marcus filed his complaint, Sarah Chen's investigative report aired on the evening news. The story was devastating for Westbridge Academy. Sarah had done her homework. Her segment included interviews with Maya and her family, clips of the evidence Maya had collected, testimonies from former teachers and students, and most damaging of all, an analysis of Westbridge's expulsion records showing the pattern of racial discrimination. The story went viral within hours. Local news became national news. Social media exploded. Parents who sent their children to Westbridge began demanding answers. Alumni spoke out about their own experiences with discrimination at the school. Educational advocacy groups called for investigations. The board of directors at Westbridge Academy suddenly found themselves in crisis mode. Donors were pulling funding. The school's reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, was in freefall. News crews camped outside the campus gates. Every major newspaper and news outlet picked up the story. Principal Whitmore released a statement defending the school's actions, but it only made things worse. He claimed the expulsion had been based on thoroughly documented evidence and multiple witness testimonies, but he refused to release any of that evidence or explain why he had never reviewed Maya's counter-evidence. The families of the 5 girls also released statements, claiming their daughters were the real victims and that Maya's accusations were part of a coordinated attack on their children. Catherine Montgomery held a press conference where she tearfully insisted that her daughter had been bullied and terrorized. But the public wasn't buying it. The evidence was too strong. Maya's documentation was too thorough. And the pattern of discrimination at Westbridge was too clear. Marcus filed an additional motion seeking Maya's immediate reinstatement while the case proceeded. He argued that Maya was being denied her education based on a discriminatory and procedurally flawed expulsion process. The judge assigned to the case, a black woman named Judge Angela Harris who had built her career on civil rights law, reviewed the evidence and scheduled an emergency hearing. The hearing took place in a packed courtroom. News cameras weren't allowed inside, but reporters filled the gallery. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus, her mother, and her grandmother. Across the aisle, Westbridge Academy's lawyers filled an entire table, expensive suits and leather briefcases, representing the institution and the 5 families. Judge Harris reviewed the evidence carefully, asking pointed questions of both sides. When it came time for Westbridge's lawyers to present their evidence of Maya's alleged bullying, their case began to crumble. The threatening messages Maya had supposedly sent were traced to fake accounts that Maya couldn't have created, given that she didn't own a smartphone at the time they were made. The witness testimonies from other students turned out to be mostly hearsay, with many students admitting under questioning that they hadn't actually witnessed anything themselves but had heard rumors from Brittany and her friends. The physical intimidation claims fell apart when confronted with Maya's small stature and quiet demeanor, compared to the larger, more aggressive behavior documented in Maya's evidence of her bullies. Judge Harris's expression grew stern as the hearing progressed. When Westbridge's lawyers finished their presentation, she leaned forward. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Harris said, her voice cutting through the courtroom. "You expelled a 10-year-old child based on allegations from 5 students who were themselves documented bullying her. You never investigated her counterclaims. You never reviewed her evidence. You gave her no opportunity to defend herself. And you did all of this within days of her reporting the bullying to a teacher. Does that sum it up?" Westbridge's lead attorney tried to respond, but Judge Harris held up her hand. "This is one of the most egregious cases of institutional bias I've seen in my 20 years on the bench. This child documented months of harassment and brought it to a trusted teacher. Instead of protecting her, you expelled her and allowed her bullies to remain in school. The discriminatory nature of this action is blatant." Judge Harris ruled in Maya's favor. She ordered Westbridge Academy to immediately reinstate Maya, to expunge the expulsion from her record, and to conduct a thorough investigation into the bullying allegations against the 5 girls. She also ordered the school to implement new anti-discrimination policies and oversight measures. But Maya didn't want to go back to Westbridge. The thought of walking those halls again, of facing those people, filled her with dread despite the vindication. Marcus had anticipated this. "You don't have to go back," he told Maya after the hearing. "We can negotiate a settlement that includes your tuition to another school, one where you'll be welcomed and valued." But something unexpected happened. The story of Maya's courage spread beyond just news coverage. It became a rallying point. Other families came forward with their own stories of discrimination at elite schools. Teachers at other institutions started speaking out about similar patterns of protecting wealthy donors while failing vulnerable students. Educational reform advocates used Maya's case to push for stronger anti-discrimination policies in private schools. And Marcus kept building his case. The civil rights lawsuit expanded into a class action, representing multiple families who had been harmed by Westbridge's discriminatory practices. The potential damages grew into millions of dollars. The pressure became overwhelming. 4 weeks after Judge Harris's ruling, Westbridge Academy's board of directors held an emergency meeting. What happened in that closed-door session wasn't immediately public, but the outcome was clear. The next morning, Principal Gerald Whitmore announced his resignation. His carefully worded statement claimed he was leaving to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew the truth. He was being forced out. Miss Patricia Holbrook also resigned, though her statement admitted more culpability. "I failed Maya Richardson," she wrote in a public letter. "I failed to protect a student who trusted me. I allowed pressure from powerful families to compromise my integrity as an educator. I am deeply sorry, and I am stepping down because I no longer deserve the privilege of teaching." The board also announced that Brittany Montgomery, Madison Clark, Ashton Wells, Harper Daniels, and Sienna Morrison were being suspended pending a full investigation. Their parents were outraged, threatening their own lawsuits, but the board held firm. The school's survival depended on showing they were serious about reform. But the real turning point came when an anonymous donor, later revealed to be a Westbridge alumna who had experienced similar discrimination decades ago, established a scholarship fund specifically for students from underrepresented backgrounds. The fund was named after Maya Richardson. Marcus negotiated a settlement with Westbridge Academy that included a formal apology, financial compensation for Maya's family, payment of all legal fees, and a guarantee that Maya could attend any private school of her choosing with full tuition paid through graduation. The settlement also required Westbridge to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training, establish an independent oversight committee for expulsion decisions, and create a safe reporting system for students who experience bullying or discrimination. The 5 girls who had bullied Maya faced their own consequences. Brittany Montgomery's family quietly withdrew her from Westbridge, sending her to boarding school in another state. Madison Clark and Ashton Wells were suspended for a semester and required to complete community service and anti-bullying counseling. Harper Daniels and Sienna Morrison received similar consequences. More importantly, other students at Westbridge began speaking out about the culture of privilege and cruelty that had been allowed to flourish. Student-led initiatives pushed for change. The school's culture slowly began to shift. Maya, meanwhile, chose to attend a different school, Riverside Academy, a private school known for its diverse student body and commitment to social justice. On her first day at Riverside, she walked through the doors with her mother and grandmother beside her, that same patched backpack on her shoulders. But this time, when she entered the classroom, students smiled at her. A girl with warm brown eyes like her own scooted over to make room at her table. "Want to sit here?" she asked. Maya sat down, and for the first time in months she felt like she could breathe. But Maya's story didn't end there. What happened next surprised even Marcus Thompson. Maya was invited to speak at a national education reform conference. At 10 years old, she stood at a podium in front of educators, administrators, and policy makers from across the country. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she held her notes, but when she started speaking, her voice was clear and strong. "I'm 10 years old," Maya began, "and I learned something this year that I shouldn't have had to learn. I learned that sometimes the adults we're supposed to trust don't protect us. I learned that money and power can matter more than truth and fairness. But I also learned that staying silent doesn't make things better. Speaking up matters even when it's scary. Documenting the truth matters even when people don't want to hear it. And fighting for what's right matters, even when you're just one person against a whole system." The audience gave her a standing ovation. Several people were crying. Maya's speech was recorded and shared online. It was watched millions of times. She became a voice for children who faced similar situations, a symbol of courage in the face of injustice. Educational institutions across the country began reviewing their own policies on bullying and discrimination. Several states passed new laws requiring better oversight of private school expulsion decisions. The Maya Richardson case became part of curriculum in education programs, teaching future teachers and administrators about the importance of protecting all students, not just those with wealthy parents. But perhaps the most meaningful change happened in Maya herself. She had walked into Westbridge Academy as a quiet, hopeful child who wanted to fit in and make her mother proud. She walked out of that experience having learned hard truths about the world, but she hadn't become bitter or broken. She had become a fighter. At Riverside Academy, Maya joined the student council. She started a peer support program for students who were being bullied, creating a safe space where kids could share their experiences and get help without fear of retaliation. She taught other students what her grandmother had taught her. Document everything, speak truth to power, and never let injustice go unchallenged. Her mother, Diane, finally cut back to one job. The settlement money meant they could afford their rent without her working herself to exhaustion. More importantly, it gave her time to be present for her daughter, to see Maya not just surviving but thriving. Ruth Richardson watched her granddaughter blossom and felt a deep sense of pride. All those years ago, when Ruth had marched for civil rights, when she had fought discrimination in her own teaching career, she had dreamed of a future where her granddaughter wouldn't have to face the same battles. That future hadn't arrived yet, but Maya's courage had moved the needle forward. 6 months after the settlement, Maya received an unexpected letter. It was from a student at Westbridge Academy, a girl named Emma Chin who had been in Maya's class. Emma wrote about how Maya's story had opened her eyes to things she had ignored or excused. She wrote about how the culture at Westbridge was changing, slowly but visibly, because students were no longer willing to accept bullying and discrimination as normal. "You probably don't remember me," Emma wrote, "but I was in your English class. I saw what they did to you and I said nothing. I was afraid of becoming a target myself. I've carried that guilt every day since you left. Your courage showed me that silence makes me complicit. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you then, but I'm trying to be better now. Because of you, a lot of us are trying to be better." Maya showed the letter to her mother and grandmother. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Ruth squeezed Maya's hand and said, "This is how change happens. One person speaks truth and it gives others permission to do the same." But not everyone was ready to change. Brittany Montgomery's family continued to insist their daughter had been wronged. In an interview with a sympathetic media outlet, Catherine Montgomery claimed that her family had been destroyed by false accusations and a biased justice system. The interview backfired spectacularly when viewers compared her claims to the documented evidence of her daughter's bullying, and the segment's comment section filled with criticism of her refusal to take responsibility. The other families handled it differently. Madison Clark's parents issued a public apology, acknowledging that they had enabled their daughter's behavior and failed to teach her empathy and respect. They pledged to do better, both as parents and as community members. It was a small gesture, but it was something. Marcus Thompson continued to work on educational discrimination cases, using the precedent from Maya's case to help other families. He established a pro bono program at his law firm specifically, focused on protecting students of color in private educational institutions. When asked by reporters why he had taken on Maya's case when his firm usually focused on larger matters, he simply said, "Because Maya Richardson reminded me of myself at 10 years old, and because someone believed in me when I needed it most. We all have a responsibility to lift up the next generation." A year after her expulsion, Maya was invited back to Westbridge Academy. Not as a student, but as a speaker at their reformed student orientation. The new principal, Dr. Jamal Washington, a black educator with a strong track record of promoting equity in schools, wanted Maya to share her story with incoming students. Maya stood in the Westbridge Auditorium, the same building where she had once felt so out of place, and looked at 400 faces staring back at her. Some were sympathetic. Some were curious. A few looked uncomfortable, probably students who had been there during her time and remembered what had happened. "When I was expelled from this school," Maya said, her voice steady and clear, "I felt like my life was over. Everything my mother had worked for, everything I had hoped for, seemed to be destroyed. But I learned something important in those dark days. Justice doesn't come easily. It doesn't come just because you're right or because you did nothing wrong. Sometimes you have to fight for it. You have to document it. You have to refuse to be silenced." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But here's what else I learned: you can't do it alone. My grandmother taught me to keep records. My mother believed in me when it felt like no one else did. A lawyer who my grandmother once taught decided to fight for me. A journalist decided my story mattered. A judge decided that the law should protect everyone, not just the powerful. It took all of them, plus my own courage, to make things right." Maya looked directly at the audience. "Some of you in this room were here when I was expelled. Some of you watched it happen. Some of you stayed silent. I'm not here to shame you because I understand being afraid. But I am here to tell you that your silence has consequences. When you see someone being mistreated, when you witness injustice, your silence means you're choosing a side. And it's not the side of the victim. She could see several students shifting uncomfortably, but she continued. Westbridge has changed since I left. New policies, new leadership, new accountability. But those changes only happened because what happened to me became public. Because people demanded better. Real change requires all of us to be better, to speak up, to stand up, to refuse to accept cruelty and discrimination as normal. When Maya finished speaking, the auditorium was silent for a moment. Then one person started clapping. Then another. And another. Soon the entire room was applauding and many students were standing. After the presentation, several students approached Maya. One boy, a scholarship student who looked nervous but determined, told her that hearing her story made him feel less alone. A girl admitted she had been afraid to report bullying she was experiencing, but Maya's courage inspired her to speak up. Another student, tears in her eyes, apologized for not defending Maya when she had the chance. Maya listened to each of them with grace, offering encouragement and advice. She exchanged contact information with some, promising to stay in touch. Before she left Westbridge that day, she walked past her old locker, the one where she had found her book torn to shreds. Someone had placed a small plaque on the wall nearby. It read, "In memory of courage. In honor of truth. Dedicated to all students who refuse to be silenced." Dr. Washington walked Maya, Diane, and Ruth out to their car. "Thank you for coming back," he said to Maya. "Thank you for being willing to help us heal and grow. What happened to you should never have happened, but your response to it has taught all of us important lessons." Maya looked back at the school building, its ivy-covered walls and prestigious facade. "I hope the students you have now never have to learn those lessons the way I did," she said. "I hope Westbridge really has changed." "We're trying," Dr. Washington said honestly. "We're still learning. But students like you make us want to do better." As they drove away from Westbridge, Maya sat between her mother and grandmother in the back seat. Diane wrapped an arm around her daughter. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Me too," Ruth added, taking Maya's hand. Maya leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, watching the school disappear in the rearview mirror. She had gone back to the place that had tried to break her, and she had walked out stronger than ever. But Maya's impact reached far beyond Westbridge Academy. Her case sparked a national conversation about discrimination in private schools, about the way wealth and privilege could corrupt institutions meant to serve all children, about the importance of believing and protecting vulnerable students. Documentary filmmakers contacted the Richardson family, wanting to tell Maya's story in depth. Educational reformers cited her case in testimony before state legislatures. Teachers across the country used her example to teach students about civil rights, due process, and standing up for what's right. Maya even received a letter from a senator who was drafting legislation to strengthen protections for students in private schools. The proposed law would require independent review of expulsion decisions, mandate anti-discrimination training, and create better reporting systems for students who experience bullying or bias. The senator wanted to name it Maya's Law. When reporters asked Maya how it felt to have a law potentially named after her, she thought carefully before responding. "It's an honor," she said, "but what I really want is for no other kid to go through what I went through. If this law can protect even one student from being expelled unjustly, from being bullied without consequences, then everything I experienced will have meant something." The proposed legislation faced opposition, of course. Private school associations argued it would impose too many regulations. Wealthy families worried it would limit their influence. But the momentum was strong, driven by Maya's documented case and the stories of countless other students who had faced similar injustices. 2 years after her expulsion, now 12 years old, Maya testified before a state legislative committee considering the bill. She sat at a table too big for her, microphone adjusted down to her height, surrounded by politicians and lawyers and lobbyists. But she wasn't intimidated. She told her story again, but this time she focused on what the law could prevent. She talked about the importance of due process, of independent oversight, of believing students who report discrimination. She explained how documentation had saved her case, and how other students needed protections even if they didn't have a grandmother who taught them to collect evidence or a lawyer willing to fight for them. When she finished testifying, even the legislators who had been skeptical of the bill looked moved. One representative, a woman who had initially opposed the legislation as government overreach, asked Maya a question. "Young lady, what do you say to people who argue that private schools should have the freedom to make their own decisions without government interference?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I'd say that freedom without accountability isn't freedom. It's power without consequences. Private schools take government funding through tax benefits and voucher programs. They benefit from public resources. And in exchange, they should have to follow basic principles of fairness and justice. No school, public or private, should be allowed to discriminate. No school should be able to expel a student without evidence or due process. Those aren't unreasonable regulations. They're basic human rights. The legislative chamber erupted in applause. The video of Maya's testimony went viral. Within 3 months, the bill passed with bipartisan support. Maya's law became a reality. At the signing ceremony, the governor invited Maya and her family to stand beside him as he signed the legislation into law. Cameras flashed. News crews recorded every moment. When the governor handed Maya the pen he had used to sign her law, she held it carefully, knowing it represented something bigger than herself. "This is for every kid who's ever been bullied and not believed," Maya said into the microphones. "For every student who faced discrimination and had nowhere to turn. For every family that couldn't afford lawyers or didn't have connections to fight back. This law says that you matter. Your rights matter. And you deserve to be protected." But even as Maya celebrated this victory, she remained grounded. She knew that laws alone wouldn't change hearts. That real transformation required ongoing work, constant vigilance, and individual choices to do better. She continued her advocacy work, but she also focused on being a kid. She made friends at Riverside Academy, joined the debate team, discovered she loved writing, and started keeping a journal not just to document injustice but to capture her thoughts, dreams, and experiences. She learned to balance her role as an activist with her need to be a normal preteen, navigating homework and friendships and growing up. Her mother, Diane, watching Maya become this confident, articulate young woman, sometimes marveled at how much had changed since that terrible day when she received the call about Maya's expulsion. The pain of that time had been transformed into purpose. The injustice had sparked a movement. Ruth Richardson, now in her 70s, often reflected on the long arc of justice she had witnessed in her lifetime. From marching in the streets during the civil rights movement to watching her granddaughter testify before legislators, she had seen progress happen incrementally, through courage and persistence. Maya's story reminded her why the fight mattered. As Maya approached her 13th birthday, she received an invitation that surprised her. Brittany Montgomery wanted to meet with her. The request came through Marcus Thompson, who had been contacted by Brittany's therapist. Brittany, now attending a different school and undergoing counseling as part of her consequences, had written Maya a letter. She wanted to apologize in person. Maya's first instinct was to refuse. Why should she give Brittany the satisfaction of forgiveness? Why should she help Brittany feel better about what she had done? But her grandmother offered perspective. "Forgiveness isn't about making her feel better," Ruth said gently. "It's about freeing yourself from carrying her burden. You don't have to forgive her if you're not ready. But meeting with her might help you understand what happened, might give you closure you didn't know you needed." After thinking about it for several days, Maya agreed to meet with Brittany, but only with her mother, grandmother, and Marcus present, in a neutral location with a mediator. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room at Marcus's law firm. Brittany arrived with her therapist, looking very different from the confident, cruel girl Maya remembered. She seemed smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced with simple jeans and a sweater, her face free of makeup, her eyes red from crying. When Brittany saw Maya, she started crying immediately. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything I did to you." Maya sat across from her, arms crossed, face neutral. She wasn't going to make this easy. Brittany continued, words tumbling out between sobs. "I was horrible to you. I was cruel. I bullied you for no reason except that you were different from me, and I thought that made me better than you. I got my friends to join in. I created those fake accounts. I spread rumors. I made your life miserable, and I never thought about how much I was hurting you. Why did you do it?" Maya asked, her voice steady but cold. Brittany wiped her eyes, struggling to answer. "Because I could. Because everyone always let me get away with everything. Because I grew up thinking that money and power meant I didn't have to care about other people. Because deep down I was jealous of you." "Jealous?" Maya's eyes narrowed. "Of what?" "Of how real you were," Brittany said quietly. "You were there because you worked hard, because you earned it. I was there because my parents paid for it. You cared about learning. I cared about status. You had a mother who loved you so much she worked 2 jobs to give you opportunities. I had parents who gave me everything except their time and attention. You were everything I wasn't, and I hated you for it." Maya listened, her face unreadable. Brittany's explanations didn't excuse her actions, but they did provide context. "What I did to you was unforgivable," Brittany continued. I know that. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I understand how wrong I was. That I'm trying to be better. That I'm facing consequences for what I did, and I'm grateful for those consequences because maybe they'll help me become someone who doesn't hurt people. Brittany pulled out a piece of paper, her hands shaking. I wrote down everything I did to you. Every lie I spread, every account I created, every time I hurt you. My therapist helped me make this list. I'm not giving it to you to upset you or to force you to relive it. I'm giving it to you because I want you to know that I'm owning what I did. All of it. She slid the paper across the table. Maya didn't touch it. I've also been working with anti-bullying organizations, Brittany said. Sharing my story. Letting them use me as an example of how privilege and power can corrupt people, how bullying destroys lives. If telling my story can help prevent other kids from becoming bullies like I was, then maybe some good can come from what I did. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Maya spoke. I don't forgive you, she said clearly. At least not yet. Maybe someday but not today. What you did to me caused real harm. You didn't just hurt my feelings. You tried to destroy my future. You got me expelled from school. You made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was less than human. Brittany nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I know. But, Maya continued, I appreciate that you're taking responsibility. I appreciate that you're trying to change. That matters. Not enough to erase what happened, but it matters. Maya reached out and took the list Brittany had made. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. I'm going to keep this. Not because I need a reminder of what you did, I'll never forget that. But because it's proof that you're acknowledging it. That's something. She stood up, preparing to leave. Then she paused and looked directly at Brittany. You said you're working with anti-bullying organizations. That's good. But here's what I want you to really understand. The harm you caused didn't end with me. Every student who watched you bully me and learned that cruelty goes unpunished, you taught them that behavior was acceptable. Every kid who was afraid to be my friend because they might become your next target, you stole those friendships from them and from me. The culture of fear and discrimination you helped create at Westbridge affected everyone, not just me. If you want to really make amends, understand the full scope of what you did. Brittany nodded, unable to speak through her tears. As Maya left the conference room with her family, Diane put an arm around her daughter. That took courage, she said. You handled that with more grace than she deserved. I didn't do it for her, Maya replied. I did it for me. I needed to see her face, to hear her take responsibility. I needed to know that she understands what she did. Now I can move forward without wondering. That meeting became another chapter in Maya's ongoing journey. She learned that justice wasn't simple, that people were complicated, that sometimes accountability and remorse mattered even when forgiveness felt impossible. 3 years after her expulsion at age 13, Maya Richardson stood at another podium, but this time it was at the National Education Association's annual conference. She had been invited as a keynote speaker, sharing the stage with educators and activists and policy makers from across the country. When I was 10 years old, Maya began, her voice now deeper and more confident than it had been during her first public speech, I learned that the world isn't always fair. I learned that sometimes people with power will use that power to hurt people without it. I learned that institutions we trust to protect children sometimes protect money and prestige instead. She paused, looking out at the thousands of educators in the audience. But I also learned that change is possible. That one person speaking truth can start a movement. That documentation and evidence matter. That there are still people who believe in justice and will fight for it. That laws can be changed and systems can be reformed when enough people demand it. Maya shared statistics about the impact of Maya's Law, which had now been adopted in 12 states. She talked about the hundreds of students who had been protected by the legislation, whose expulsions had been reviewed by independent panels, who had been believed when they reported discrimination. But laws alone don't create change, Maya emphasized. Culture creates change. And culture is made up of individual choices. Every teacher in this room has the power to protect or to harm students. Every time you see bullying and decide whether to intervene, you're making a choice. Every time a student comes to you with a complaint and you decide whether to believe them, you're making a choice. Every time you see inequality or discrimination and decide whether to speak up, you're making a choice. She looked directly at the audience. Choose to believe students. Choose to protect the vulnerable. Choose to challenge systems that allow discrimination. Choose to create classrooms where every child feels valued and safe. That's how we create real change. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. After her speech, Maya was surrounded by teachers who wanted to share their own stories, to thank her, to ask for advice. One elderly black teacher, tears streaming down her face, grabbed Maya's hand and said, "I've been teaching for 40 years. I've seen so many children hurt by the things you experienced. Thank you for fighting back. Thank you for making their pain mean something." Maya hugged her, feeling the weight of all the students who had been failed by systems that should have protected them. That evening, as Maya sat in her hotel room with her mother and grandmother, watching news coverage of her speech, she reflected on how far she had come from that terrified 10-year-old girl being marched out of Westbridge Academy. "Do you ever regret going through all of this?" Diane asked her daughter. "Do you wish things had been different?" Maya thought about the question seriously. "I wish I had never been bullied," she said honestly. "I wish I had never been expelled. I wish I had never had to fight this fight. But I don't regret how I responded to it. I don't regret speaking up or fighting back. And I can't regret the changes that came from it, the students who have been protected because of it." She looked at her mother and grandmother, the two women who had stood by her through everything. "You taught me that injustice requires a response. That silence makes you complicit. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. I'm who I am because of what you taught me." Ruth squeezed her granddaughter's hand, pride shining in her eyes. "And you've taught us too. You've shown us that age doesn't determine courage. That one voice can matter. That the next generation is ready to fight for justice in ways we couldn't have imagined." As Maya looked out the hotel window at the city lights below, she thought about all the students out there who were facing their own battles with bullying, discrimination, and injustice. She thought about the teachers who were trying to protect them, the families who were struggling to support them, the systems that were slowly, painfully changing. She knew her story wasn't unique. There were countless Maya Richardsons out there, fighting their own fights, facing their own Principal Whitmores and their own Brittany Montgomerys. But she hoped that her story gave them courage. That her victory showed them change was possible. That her voice amplified theirs. Maya's story became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of speaking truth to power. But she never wanted to be just a symbol. She wanted to be a catalyst for real, lasting change. And in the years that followed, that's exactly what she became. By the time Maya Richardson graduated from high school with top honors, Maya's law had been adopted in 32 states. Hundreds of students had been protected by its provisions. Dozens of discriminatory expulsions had been overturned. Countless schools had reformed their policies to ensure fairness and accountability. But perhaps the most important impact wasn't in the laws or the policies. It was in the conversations that Maya's story sparked. Families talked about discrimination and privilege. Students learned about standing up for what's right. Educators reconsidered how they handled complaints of bullying and bias. Institutions examined their own practices and prejudices. Maya went on to attend Harvard Law School, following in Marcus Thompson's footsteps. She wanted to continue the fight for educational justice, to represent students who face discrimination, to push for systemic change. Her admission essay told her story and her vision for the future, and the admissions committee was moved by her passion and her lived experience. On the day Maya left for college, Diane and Ruth stood with her at the bus station, helping her load her bags. Maya still had that old backpack, patched and worn, though she had newer luggage now. She kept it as a reminder of where she came from, of what she had overcome. "I'm so proud of you," Diane said, hugging her daughter tight. "Everything I worked for, everything I dreamed of for you, you've surpassed it all." "Because of you," Maya replied. "Because you never gave up on me. Because you believed in me even when the whole world seemed against us." Ruth wiped tears from her eyes. "You've done what I always hoped someone would do. You've made the world a little more just. You've protected children who couldn't protect themselves. You've shown people that courage and truth matter." As Maya boarded the bus that would take her to her new life, she turned back one more time to wave at her mother and grandmother. Two generations of strong black women who had taught her everything she knew about fighting for justice. The bus pulled away and Maya settled into her seat, looking out at the city where she had grown up, where she had faced her greatest challenges and won her most important victories. She thought about that 10-year-old girl who had walked out of Westbridge Academy with tears streaming down her face but her head held high. She thought about everything that had happened since then, all the battles fought and won, all the changes made, all the lives touched. And she thought about the future, about all the students she would represent, all the injustices she would fight, all the systems she would challenge. Maya Richardson's story started with injustice, but it became a story about courage, resilience, and the power of refusing to be silenced. It became a story about how one person can make a difference, how truth can prevail over power, how justice can triumph even when the odds seem impossible. In the face of bias and injustice, courage and determination don't always win immediately. Sometimes the fight is long and painful. Sometimes the cost is high. But Maya's story proved that when you stand up for what's right, when you refuse to back down, when you document the truth and demand accountability, change is possible. Her legacy wasn't just in the laws that bore her name or the policies that were changed because of her case. Her legacy was in every student who felt empowered to speak up when they faced injustice. In every teacher who chose to believe and protect vulnerable students. In every family that refused to accept discrimination as normal. In every person who learned from her story that silence in the face of injustice is itself a form of injustice. Maya Richardson was expelled from school at 10 years old for standing up against the people who were bullying her. But she didn't let that expulsion define her. She didn't let those bullies win. She didn't let that injustice go unchallenged. She fought back. She documented the truth. She demanded accountability. And she won. Not just for herself, but for every child who would come after her. For every student who would be protected by the laws and policies her courage inspired. For every person who would learn from her story that justice is worth fighting for. That's the power of standing up. That's the impact of speaking truth to power. That's the legacy of one brave little girl who refused to be silenced. If this story inspired you, if Maya's courage moved you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe in justice and change. We share stories like Maya's every week, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about courage in the face of adversity, about the power of speaking truth to power. And let us know in the comments. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between staying silent and speaking up? What did you do? What would you tell your younger self about standing up for what's right? Because Maya's story isn't just her story. It's a story about all of us, about the choices we make when we witness injustice, about the courage we find when we need it most. Thank you for listening to Maya Richardson's story. Thank you for caring about justice. And thank you for being part of a community that believes every child deserves to be protected, believed, and valued. Remember, in the face of bias and injustice, courage and determination can change the world. One voice can matter. One person can make a difference. Stand up. Speak out. Document the truth. Demand accountability. Because that's how we create change. That's how we protect the vulnerable. That's how we build a world where every child, regardless of their race or their economic status or their circumstances, has the opportunity to learn and grow in safety and dignity. That's Maya Richardson's legacy. And it can be yours too.